Rain fell steady over the French Quarter that October evening. Inside the small storefront of Hollister Restoration, the smell of walnut oil and beeswax hung thick in the air. Daniel stood at the workbench under a single hooded lamp, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a brass hinge pin held between his fingers. The front door opened. A woman stepped inside. She did not say her name. She did not begin with hello. She set a manila envelope on the workbench and looked at him. "Pretend you are my husband. For 90 days. It's for my father. I'm not asking for anything else." Daniel set the hinge pin down. The old band saw kept turning beside her. "If you believe one quiet yes can change a stranger's life forever, stay with us all the way until the very last line." 3 days before the rain, Vivienne Ashford sat in a private consultation room on the 7th floor of MUSC Medical Center in Charleston. Her father had collapsed at the foundation office that morning. The oncologist spoke softly across a small table. "Stage 4, the lungs. 3 months, perhaps a little more, perhaps a little less." Vivienne did not cry in the consultation room. She signed the consent forms in a steady hand and walked back to the bedside. Thomas Ashford was 78 years old. He had been a naval officer, then a philanthropist, then a widower for 19 years. He had raised one daughter without help. Now he lay against a starched white pillow with an oxygen line beneath his nose, and his hands folded across the blanket. He waited until she sat down. He waited until the nurse stepped out. "Vivienne," he said. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Do not marry Preston Caldwell. I should have said this when you were 29 years old. I was a coward. Now I am out of time." The room held very still. For 7 years she had assumed it. Everyone had assumed it. Preston had been at every Christmas, every charity dinner, every gala. He spoke of their future as if it had already been written down somewhere. Her father had never approved out loud. He had also never refused. She gripped the edge of the hospital bed. "Why now?" "Because I will not leave you with him." She did not argue. She listened the way a child listens, even at 36 years old. He told her what he had watched across the years. The way Preston spoke to staff when he believed no one was listening, the way he reorganized her calendar without asking, the way 3 of her oldest friends had quietly dropped out of her life over the course of a decade. The small things. The patient things. By the time her father stopped speaking, Vivienne understood she had been someone else's project for a very long time. That night, in the house on the Battery, she opened the bottom drawer of her father's desk. She kept old business cards there, the ones the household staff handed her in passing. Restoration companies, framers, antique dealers. She lifted a card from near the back. Hollister Restoration. The man who had repaired her grandfather's leather wing chair 2 months earlier. She remembered him the way one remembered a steady light at the end of a long hallway. He had not tried to charm her. When she had asked about the cracked frame, he had said only, "The chair was loved before it was broken. That part of it stays." He had a photograph of his late wife on the corner of his bench. He had not moved it when she walked in. She did not drive to the French Quarter the next morning. She sat in her father's office for 2 days, taking the card out of the drawer and putting it back. She tried to think of someone else. She thought of 2 cousins in Savannah who would have laughed at the request. She thought of an old college friend in Atlanta who had married twice and divorced twice, and would have wanted 1,000 questions answered. She thought of a man she had not spoken to in 4 years. None of them were possible. None of them would have made her father rest easier in his last weeks. On the 3rd evening, when the rain came in off the harbor, she put on her coat and drove down to the French Quarter. She did not call ahead. She offered him $75,000 in cash. He shook his head before she finished the sentence. She tried a different way. "My father met you once. He remembered you. He does not remember most people anymore." Daniel Hollister was quiet for a long time. He looked at the photograph of his late wife, then back at the woman across the bench. "My daughter cannot know it is a contract," he said. "To her, this has to be real." Vivienne nodded. They did not shake hands. They did not need to. Daniel and Hannah arrived at the Ashford house on the Battery on a Tuesday afternoon. Hannah was 8 years old. She carried a cloth rabbit under one arm and a tin of 24 wax crayons under the other. She did not ask many questions. Her father had told her this was a long visit, and Hannah believed her father. Vivienne met them at the front door. She knelt down to Hannah's eye level and offered her hand the way one offered it to an adult. Hannah looked at the hand, then up at her father, then back at Vivienne. She shook it once. Thomas Ashford waited in the dining room in a wheelchair. He had insisted on a proper dinner the first night. The candles were lit. The silver was out. Beatrice Mercer, the day nurse, hovered near the doorway in a soft cardigan and watched the level on the oxygen tank. When Daniel walked in, Thomas studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, slow and tired. "The man who fixed the chair," Thomas said. Daniel nodded once. He took the seat across from the old man because that was where the place card said to sit. Hannah took the seat beside her father and unfolded her napkin with great care. Thomas ate very little. He spoke more than he had in weeks. He told Hannah about the chair, about his own father reading the same 6 books in it for 40 years. He told Daniel that the new finish on the armrest was the closest match to the original he had ever seen. He told Vivienne quietly that he was glad. After dinner, he asked Daniel to push him out onto the back veranda. The two men sat looking at the harbor in the dark. Boats blinked in the channel. "I served as a naval liaison to the Department of Justice in 1984, Thomas said. "I knew a few enforcement attorneys back then. I followed a case in 2016. Aldwin Pharmaceuticals. The lead counsel from the Securities and Exchange Commission was named Hollister. Same surname as yours. About the right age, give or take." Daniel did not answer. Thomas smiled at the harbor. "I am not asking. I am only saying I am glad my daughter brought you home, whoever you are. She has not been good at choosing in the past. This is the first time she has chosen right." He reached over and placed his hand on Daniel's wrist. His skin was thin as paper. Daniel did not pull his hand away. Inside, Vivienne stood at the dining room threshold beside Beatrice. Hannah had fallen asleep against the back of her chair, one cheek pressed to the linen. Vivienne watched her for a moment. Then she watched her father through the tall glass doors, talking to a man whose first name she had only learned 3 days earlier. Later that night, after Daniel had carried Hannah upstairs to the guest room, Vivienne found him on the back steps. He was nursing a glass of water and looking at the same harbor her father had been looking at. "What did he say to you?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a while. "He thanked me." She did not press him. She sat down beside him, leaving a careful distance, and watched the same dark water. At 11 o'clock that night, Preston Caldwell called her cell phone. His voice was soft as always and very cold. "I hear you got married, Vivienne. You didn't think it might be a good idea to tell me first." She ended the call. Her hand was trembling when she set the phone down. The Ashford Foundation's Autumn Gala took place at the Charleston Maritime Museum on a clear Saturday evening, 2 weeks after Daniel moved into the house on the Battery. Vivienne had attended the gala 15 years in a row. She had hosted it for the last 8. Daniel wore a navy suit without a tie. He had bought it at a tailor on King Street earlier that week, paid in cash, and asked the man to take in the shoulders by half an inch. He stood beside Vivienne the way a man stood beside a woman he had stood beside for years. He did not try to perform. That was the part that made it work. Preston Caldwell arrived 20 minutes late. He kissed Vivienne on the cheek before she could turn away. He shook Daniel's hand and held it a second too long. "Congratulations," Preston said. "Vivienne has been very private about you. Where did the two of you meet?" "Exactly. Through her father," Daniel said. Preston waited for more. None came. He smiled, the way a man smiled when he was deciding what to do next, and moved on toward the bar. Hannah arrived in the second hour, dropped off by the Foundation's events coordinator. She wore a navy dress and patent leather shoes. She found her father immediately and held his hand. Vivienne knelt down. "Hi, Hannah." Hannah looked at her for a long, serious moment. Then she said, "You smell like my mom used to. Oranges and wood." Vivienne did not know what to do with her face. She looked up at Daniel. Daniel placed a hand on Hannah's shoulder. "That is a kind thing to say, sweetheart." Hannah nodded once and asked if there were any of the small sandwiches with the cucumber on them. The rest of the evening passed in the way galas pass. Speeches. A toast for Thomas, who was too ill to attend. Polite applause. Vivienne made the rounds with her hand resting in the crook of Daniel's arm. He let her lead. When she needed a moment to breathe, he found her a glass of water without being asked. Preston caught up with her near the coat room at the end of the night. He stood too close. "Your father is not himself," he said. "He is making decisions he will regret. I am only saying this because I care for both of you. When the time comes, I hope you will let me help." Daniel appeared at her side without sound. He did not put his arm around her. He simply stood there. "We appreciate the offer," Daniel said. His voice was very even. "We will let you know if we need anything." Preston held his look for 2 full seconds, then nodded once and walked away across the marble floor. On the drive home, Hannah slept across the back seat with her shoes off. Vivienne stared out the passenger window. Charleston at night rolled past the glass in soft gold and brown. "I am sorry," she said finally. "I did not think she would say something like that." "Don't be sorry," Daniel said. "She is being 8. She is getting used to a woman being in the house." Vivienne looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "You are very good at this," she said quietly. "I am not doing anything." "I know," she said. "That is what is good about it." When they pulled into the driveway, she realized she had been gripping her seatbelt strap hard enough to leave a red mark across her palm. Sunday mornings at the house on the Battery were quiet. Beatrice Mercer came off her overnight shift at 6 and sat at the kitchen table while the coffee brewed. She had nursed 3 generations of Charleston families. She knew the shape of a household the way some people knew the shape of a song. Daniel came down at 6:15 in a gray t-shirt and jeans, the way he had every morning for 2 weeks. He poured 2 cups without asking. He set one in front of her. She watched him for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Hollister, may I tell you something that is not my place?" He sat down. "Please." "Mr. Caldwell visits Mr. Thomas every Tuesday and every Friday when Vivienne is at the foundation office. He arrives at 10:15. He brings a black leather briefcase. He stays for exactly 45 minutes. I have written down every visit for 3 months. Daniel set the coffee down. "Why have you not told her?" "Because she loves her father, and because she has known Mr. Caldwell since she was 29 years old. She would not believe me. She would believe you." He was quiet a long time. "Have you written down what he brings?" "Not what is inside the case. I cannot see inside. But I have written down the times, and I have written down the day he came with a notary public." Daniel looked up. "What was the notary's name?" Beatrice slid a folded slip of paper across the table. He read it. He folded it once and put it in his shirt pocket. "Thank you, Beatrice. You are welcome, Mr. Hollister." She rose with her coffee. At the doorway she turned. "You look at Mr. Thomas the way a man looks at his father. Mr. Caldwell looks at him the way a man looks at a filing cabinet." She went upstairs to sleep. Daniel sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she left. Hannah came down in pajamas with a drawing she had finished the night before. It was a picture of Vivienne sitting on the porch beside Thomas in his wheelchair. Their hands almost touched in the picture, but not quite. "Daddy," Hannah said, climbing onto the chair beside him. "How long are we staying here?" He brushed her hair back from her forehead. "Until Mr. Thomas does not need us anymore." She thought about this very carefully. She was a child who took questions seriously. "Mr. Thomas is always going to need us." Daniel did not correct her. That afternoon, Vivienne came home from the foundation office and stopped in the doorway of the back garden. Daniel was kneeling beside a flower bed with Hannah, showing her how to break the soil around an azalea root without cutting the smaller threads beneath. He spoke very quietly. Hannah listened with the kind of attention children only gave to the things they trusted. Vivienne stood at the doorway for a long minute before she set down her bag and went upstairs to change. She did not know why her eyes burned. She washed her face in cold water and stood at the bedroom window for another minute before she came back down. That night, Vivienne found him in the library. She did not say anything. She set a tumbler of whiskey on the side table beside his chair and took the chair opposite him. She picked up a book she had no intention of reading. He picked up the book he had been pretending to read for an hour. They sat that way for 2 hours. The fire in the grate burned down to embers. Neither of them moved. When she finally stood to go to bed, she stopped beside his chair. She placed her hand on his shoulder for 3 full seconds. He did not turn around. He did not need to. She did not say goodnight. He did not say it back. Upstairs, in the dark hallway, she pressed her palm flat against the cool plaster wall and breathed in and out for a full minute before she opened her bedroom door. Daniel began keeping track of Preston's schedule the way he used to keep track of a witness list. He did not make notes on paper. He kept them in his head, in the careful columns where he had once held docket numbers and exhibit logs. On the Tuesday of the 6th week, he left the woodshop at noon and drove back to the Battery. He told Vivienne he had forgotten a book. He had not forgotten a book. He came through the side door and stood in the hallway outside the study. The pocket doors were not fully closed. He did not lean in. He stood where the angle of the brass hinge let him see one corner of the room and let him hear everything. Preston was speaking, soft and reasonable, the way he always spoke. "Uncle Thomas, this is just a precautionary medical power of attorney, so that I can help Vivienne when the time comes that you are not awake for the decisions. She should not have to carry this on her own. You know how she gets." Thomas's hand shook around a fountain pen. His eyes were on the document, but his eyes were not reading. The morphine sat across his shoulders that morning like a careful weight. Beatrice walked in then, carrying a blood pressure cuff. Her face was composed. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to take Mr. Ashford's vitals. Please leave the document with me. I will pass it to the family attorney." Preston's smile did not move, but something behind it did. He gathered the papers slowly. He took the pen back. He said his goodbyes with the warmth of a man who had not been interrupted at all. When Preston had gone, Daniel stepped into the study. Thomas looked up. For a moment his eyes cleared the way they sometimes did in the late mornings. "I did not sign anything," Thomas said, "but I did not have the strength to push him out." "You do not have to push him out anymore," Daniel said. "I will do that part." Thomas nodded once. He closed his eyes. That night Daniel asked Beatrice for the journal. She brought it down to him in the kitchen, wrapped in a clean dish towel, as if it were something fragile. He read it page by page in his bedroom with the door locked. He read until he reached the entry from 6 weeks earlier. Preston had brought a notary public to the house on a Friday morning. Daniel knew the notary's name. He had seen that name in a sealed referral from the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2012. The man had been disciplined for certifying forged signatures in 3 estate matters in upstate Georgia. The matter had never reached criminal charges. The notary had moved to Charleston the following year and reopened under a different firm. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a long time. He was not afraid. He had not been afraid in a courtroom in 12 years, but he understood now what kind of work he was about to do, and he understood that the cost of doing it would be public and that the woman sleeping at the other end of the hallway would have to walk through that public cost beside him. He turned off the lamp. He did not sleep that night. Hannah broke the photograph by accident. She was carrying a stack of picture books from the front room to the upstairs library, and her elbow caught the edge of a small framed photograph her father had set on the shelf the week they moved in. The frame slid off and hit the rug. The glass cracked. The cardboard backing came loose. A folded square of paper that had been hidden behind the picture slipped out across the rug. Hannah crouched down. She had been taught to fix things. She picked up the paper and unfolded it because she did not know it was supposed to stay folded. It was a diploma. Yale Law School. Daniel William Hollister. 2008. Vivienne passed the doorway and stopped. Hannah looked up. "I broke the picture. I am sorry." Vivienne knelt down. "It is all right, sweetheart. We can fix the frame." She took the paper gently. She did not read it twice. She did not need to. She found Daniel on the back veranda that evening, watching the harbor again, the same harbor he had watched with her father 5 weeks earlier. She held out the diploma. He took it. He looked at it for a long moment, then at her. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He told her. Yale Law. 12 years at the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Aldwin case. The tobacco settlement case before that. His father, William Hollister, a federal judge on the First Circuit who had passed in 2020. The family firm in Boston that had been in operation since 1891, his refusal of the partnership seat the spring after his wife died, the move south, the shop, Hannah's school. "I did not want her to grow up being looked at through a last name," he said. "I wanted her to be looked at first." Vivienne asked the question she had been holding since the gala. "Why did you agree to this, Daniel?" He took a long time to answer. 6 months ago, your father came to the shop. He had a leather wing chair in the back of a borrowed truck. He saw the photograph of Sarah on my bench. He did not ask about her. He looked at the photograph and he said, "I am sorry. She looks like a woman who knew how to love." Then he handed me the chair. That was all. I did not forget it. Vivienne did not speak for a long time. Then he set Beatrice's journal on the small iron table between them. He opened it to the page that mattered. "Vivienne, Preston has been preparing to challenge your father's estate. He needs your father to sign a document in the next week or two. I am going to stop him, but you should know what I am doing, because after your father is gone, this is going to become a public legal matter. Your name will be in it. So will his." She looked down at the open journal. Then she looked at his hand resting beside the journal. Then she placed her hand next to his. They did not touch. They were only close. For 6 weeks they had circled each other through hallways and dinners and the small, slow rooms of a dying man's house. This was the first time either of them had acknowledged that something was happening. She left her hand there until the lamp on the porch flickered down to nothing. Thomas turned in the 10th week. The hospice nurses set up the rented bed in the front parlor so he could see the harbor from the window. Beatrice did not leave the house. She slept in 2-hour shifts on a folding cot in the hallway. On a Wednesday night, in the second hour past midnight, Thomas opened his eyes and asked for Daniel. Daniel came down in a sweater and sat in the wooden chair beside the bed. The room was lit only by the small lamp Beatrice had positioned near the window. Thomas reached for his left wrist and unbuckled the steel watch he had worn for 57 years. A Hamilton, plain black face, sweep second hand, a small scratch across the crystal at the 4 o'clock position. "My father bought this in Pearl Harbor in 1946, Thomas said. His voice was thin but very clear. "I bought my own in Yokosuka in 1969, the week before I shipped out to the South China Sea. When my father died, his came to me. I have worn his on Sundays for 40 years. He held it out. Daniel did not move. "I do not have a son," Thomas said, "but I have you." Daniel took the watch. His hand was steady. His eyes were not. Thomas held his wrist for a moment. "Take care of her. Not because of the contract, because she is worth taking care of." He closed his eyes. Thomas Ashford died at 4:11 on the morning of the 78th day. Vivienne did not cry. She sat on the side of the bed and held his hand until the sun came up. When Beatrice came in to begin the small, quiet work the dying ask of the living, Vivienne stood and walked out of the room. She walked all the way down the hall and out onto the veranda, and she stood there in her bare feet looking at the harbor until Daniel came and stood beside her. He did not touch her. He stood close enough that she could lean if she wanted to. She leaned. The funeral was held at St. Philip's Church on the 82nd day. A light January rain. Vivienne stood beside the casket in a black coat. Hannah held her hand. Nobody had told Hannah to do that. She had decided. Daniel stood one step behind them. Preston came to the funeral in a tailored black suit. He embraced Vivienne longer than was appropriate. He leaned in close to her ear. "I am here for you. I have always been here for you." She did not answer. Daniel did not move. He looked at Preston with a kind of stillness that was not hostility, and was not patience either. It was the look of a man who had stood across courtrooms from men far worse than Preston Caldwell. Preston felt it. He left the reception 45 minutes early. That night, Vivienne sat in her father's study with the Hamilton watch in her hand. The leather of the strap was warm from being held. Daniel came in and set a cup of tea on the desk beside her. "I do not know what I am doing anymore, Daniel." He sat down across from her. He did not reach for her. "You are staying alive." That is what he wanted. She looked at him. Her eyes were dry, but her face had the kind of stillness that came after a long cry that had already happened in private. "Thank you for being here." He nodded. 4 days after the funeral, Preston Caldwell filed a petition in Charleston County Probate Court. He requested authentication of a codicil to the will of Thomas Ashford, allegedly signed 3 weeks before death, which named Preston Caldwell as co-trustee of the Ashford Foundation. Attached was a medical power of attorney dated the same day, witnessed by a notary public Daniel had already identified. The authentication hearing took place in the offices of Marsh, Pendleton, and Bryce on Broad Street. Eleanor Marsh, the family attorney for 41 years, sat at the head of the conference table. Vivienne sat to her right. Preston sat opposite, flanked by 2 attorneys in matching dark suits. Daniel sat in a chair against the wall. No one had introduced him. Preston presented his case in his soft, reasonable voice. He had been close to Thomas Ashford for 2 decades. The codicil reflected Thomas's true wishes. Vivienne was grieving. She should not be expected to manage the foundation alone. When he finished, Daniel stood up. "My name is Daniel William Hollister. I am a former senior counsel for the Enforcement Division of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. I graduated from Yale Law School in 2008. I am the lawful husband of Vivienne Ashford as of October of this year. I am submitting the following materials as an interested party. He placed 3 folders on the table. The first contained the notarized journal of Beatrice Mercer, documenting every visit Preston had made to the house, including the date a notary public had accompanied him. The second contained a forensic signature analysis, prepared by a document examiner in Atlanta. The examiner had compared the signature on the contested codicil against 30 exemplar signatures of Thomas Ashford, spanning the previous 5 years. The conclusion was that the contested signature was a trace forgery, produced by overlaying an authentic signature and tracing it in fresh ink. The third contained the sealed referral from the Securities and Exchange Commission from 2012 concerning the notary public Preston had used. Eleanor Marsh read the materials in silence. When she finished, she removed her reading glasses and folded them on the table. She looked at Preston. "Mr. Caldwell, I have represented this family for 41 years. I am transferring these materials to the Charleston County Solicitor's office in the morning." Preston rose halfway out of his chair. "Vivienne, you do not know who this man is. You are letting a stranger destroy what we have built." Vivienne looked at him. Her voice was very even. "Preston, there is no we. There never was." Preston's attorneys gathered their papers without speaking. The senior of the two would not meet his eye. Preston was escorted out by a Charleston County Sheriff's deputy who had been waiting in the hallway since the hearing began. Eleanor Marsh had arranged it the night before, the moment she had read the affidavits. Eleanor closed the folders one by one and set her hand on the top one. She looked at Vivienne. "Your father knew this day would come. 3 weeks before he passed, he asked me to draw up a parallel set of instructions for the foundation and the trust. He told me you would only need to see them if a certain person attempted what we have just witnessed. I am going to bring them to your house on Friday morning. We will read them together." Vivienne nodded once. She did not trust her voice. She found Daniel at the elevator with his hands in his pockets. She did not speak. He did not speak. The elevator doors opened. He held them with one hand and waited. She stepped in beside him. They rode down 5 floors without a word. On the sidewalk outside, the January sun was very bright and very cold. 2 days after the authentication hearing, Daniel began folding his shirts. The original 90-day window in the contract had quietly come and gone the week before. Neither of them had spoken the date out loud. The house on the Battery felt larger than it had in November. Many of the foundation files had already been moved to the law office. The hospice equipment had been carried out. The rented bed in the parlor was gone. The wing chair sat in its place against the south wall, polished, waiting for the next thing. Hannah sat on the stairs in her socks and watched her father pack. She was 8 years old, and she was learning the shapes of departure. "Daddy, are we going home?" "Yes, sweetheart. Will Miss Vivi come visit?" He paused with a folded shirt in his hands. "Maybe. She has a lot to take care of right now." Hannah thought about this for a while. Then she got up and went down the stairs. She found Vivienne in the library, sorting through her father's correspondence. Hannah sat down on the rug beside her chair and put a folded drawing on Vivienne's lap. The drawing was a small house. Not the Battery, not a mansion. A single-story cottage with a wide front porch. 3 people stood in front of it. A man in a flannel shirt, a woman with brown hair, a little girl holding the woman's hand. Across the roof, in careful pencil, Hannah had written one word: home. "I drew my daddy's house," Hannah said. "You are the one in the middle." She got up and went back upstairs. Vivienne held the drawing for a long time. Beatrice came down with her coat over one arm. She had taken her final paycheck from Marsh and Pendleton that morning and was leaving for her sister's house in Beaufort. She set down a small cardboard box of leftover medical supplies in the front hall and crossed the parlor to where Vivienne sat with the drawing in her hand. "Mr. Hollister is a good man," Beatrice said quietly. "I have nursed 7 dying men in my career. Your father was the 5th I held the hand of. Daniel sat with him in a way I have only seen sons do. I thought you should hear that from me before you make any decisions you cannot take back." Vivienne nodded. Beatrice picked up her cardboard box and went out through the front door. The latch closed behind her. The house felt as if a clock had stopped somewhere inside the walls. She found Daniel in the guest room. He was folding a gray flannel shirt. She did not say anything. She walked to the open suitcase and set the drawing on top of his folded clothes. "I need time," she said. "My father just died. I just walked out of 7 years with the wrong man. If I say anything to you right now, I will not know if I am saying it because it is true." He nodded. He had known she would say this. He had been waiting for it. "I know. You do not have to say anything yet. Where will you be?" "Same place. The shop is still there. Hannah is still in her school. When you are ready, you will know where to find me." He did not embrace her. She did not embrace him. He reached out and placed the flat of his palm against her cheek for the length of a single breath, then took it away. The next morning at 7 o'clock, Daniel's truck rolled out of the gates of the house on the Battery. Hannah sat in the passenger seat with her cloth rabbit and a small box of crayons. Vivienne stood at the second-floor window of her father's bedroom and watched them go. She did not cry. She walked downstairs to the wing chair against the south wall. She sat in it. She put her hand on the armrest where Daniel had matched the new finish to the old grain. The seam was perfect. She could not find it with her fingertips. She closed her eyes. April came to Charleston the way it always did. The yellow jessamine bloomed along the causeway out to Sullivan's Island. The wind off the harbor lost its winter edge. The light grew long and soft in the late afternoons. Vivienne had spent the 3 months doing the quiet work that grief asks. She had closed the estate. She had stepped down from the executive director's chair at the foundation and kept her seat on the board. She had sold the house on the Battery. It had been too large for one woman. She had moved into a smaller place in Mount Pleasant with a back garden and a view of the wetlands. For the first time in her life, she lived in a house that did not have her family's name on the deed. On a Saturday morning in the second week of April, she got into her car and drove out toward Sullivan's Island. She did not call ahead. She found them on the wide stretch of sand below the lighthouse. Hannah was building a sandcastle near the waterline. Daniel sat on a bleached piece of driftwood with a thermos of coffee, watching the water. He was wearing the gray flannel shirt and a wool cap. He did not see Vivienne coming. Hannah saw her first. She stood up, hand shading her eyes, and then she ran. She did not slow down. She crossed 30 yards of sand and wrapped both arms around Vivienne's waist and held on. Vivienne knelt down in the sand and held her back. Daniel rose from the driftwood. He did not come closer. He stood and waited. Vivienne walked the last yards alone. She set a small wooden box on the driftwood between them. She opened it. Inside was the Hamilton watch. "My father wanted you to have it. I held it for 3 months because I was not ready to give it. Today I am ready." Daniel looked at the watch. Then he looked at her. "Is that why you came?" She shook her head. She stepped closer, the way one stepped into water that one had been waiting to step into for a long time. The contract ended on the 90th day. "I would like to begin a different one. No timetable, no paperwork. Not because of my father. Because of me." Daniel set the thermos down on the driftwood beside the watch. He took one step forward. For the first time in 6 months of knowing her, he placed his open hand against her cheek and let it stay there. He did not move his hand away. He looked at her the way one looked at the first land after a long passage at sea, slowly, carefully, as if he could not yet be sure he was seeing it correctly. "I have been waiting," he said. "Not for you to come back, for you to be ready." "They are not the same thing." She nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. "I love my daughter more than my own life," he said, "and I am bringing you into a house with that. You should know what that means before you walk in." "I know what it means," Vivienne said. "I have been thinking about it for 3 months." "Are you sure?" he said. She nodded. Hannah came up behind them. She did not understand all of it. She understood enough. She put one small arm around her father's waist and one small arm around Vivienne's, and she leaned her cheek against Vivienne's hip, and she stood there. The 3 of them stood on the sand together while the tide came in around their feet. The chair had come home before they had. So had the watch. The man and the woman were the last things to arrive, and they arrived together, and neither of them had been looking for anything anymore. They were only there, and being there, finally, was enough.